Okay, this is again looking at the amount of fish that we get and what goes into this process. What we were talking about just at the end of the fourth lecture was the sustainability of this process. And as it is right now, it is not sustainable. There's an overfishing that's taking place. And this is some of the reasons why is you can see that it's about $25 billion per year is spent more than the catch is actually worth. So because of that, a lot of subsidies are necessary in the system to make it worthwhile. One of the things that the government has set up to try to limit the amount of overcatch is setting up these quotas, these transferable quotas, almost like a carbon tax. The same idea of that is that you can trade these things around. So if you don't fish a certain amount, you could sell them to somebody else. So it may be profitable to you to sell off the amount of fish that you could have harvested. But you have to have a license to go out and catch what you can. So what is an aquaculture? It's the same idea as a CAFO, except you're doing it with fish, and people aren't as touchy and feely about the fish as they are the cows. So that's a good thing. But it's actually a really good idea, and you're seeing it more and more when you go into the grocery store when it says farm raised salmon or catfish or tilapia or whatever it is you have to be looking at. It gives you a rather sustainable crop. You're not depleting the wild resources, and you're able to kind of concentrate this into a one particular location, which has its pluses and minuses. I guess you would say some of the minuses would be that these things produce a lot of waste, just like the CAFOs do, and you have to somehow deal with that. One of the things that they have done, which has been really beneficial, is that they can start to put motors on these cages, put them really far out into the ocean, and move them around. So as this cage is moving from one location to another, it's filtering out a lot of that waste. Another potential problem with these type of feedlots is that these fish are in really close proximity to each other, so they douse them with a lot of antibiotics to prevent them from getting each other sick. So again, you have this unnatural product which is going into our food supply, which, for obvious reasons, is not good. Okay. Other things that we have done, can do, is introducing a natural service to the system instead of pesticides. So there's some predatory organisms we could put out there, whether they're things like we have in regards to this, spiders or ladybugs. These things will feed upon pests that are naturally in the environment and can limit the amount of pesticides we actually have to spray. Here's a couple little disadvantages that you can pause and take a look at on your own time. Next one on the list is Rachel Carson. She's one of the pillars of environmental science. She brought a really big awareness to the amount of pesticides that were out in the environment and the damages that they were producing in regards to songbirds. But the main one we seem to be looking at here in this class is higher up on the food chain, such as the predatory birds, such as eagles and hawks. They were having the largest difficulties with their growth in regards to crossbeak and eggs not forming because of thin shells. So what would we like out of a pesticide? This is some of the things that we typically would be beneficial. They are not persistent. This one here, non-persistent. So they're there for a little while, but eventually they go away. This is a big problem in regards to many of the things we put into trees. PCBs, as an example, we use that as a preservative for trees, but then of course it lingers in the environment and isn't good for people. But all these pesticides, we would like them to be non-persistent. This is just a nice little example of a super pest that's very difficult to control and can cause a great deal of money to try to deal with their control. So just kind of looking at another term that we're going to focus on is the pesticide treadmill. The idea that after a period of time of applying a pesticide, it's not as effective as it once was because of this natural selection that takes place. Pesticides build up, the pests will build up a resistance to whatever it is you're spraying. And long term, you're going to have to develop some other new pesticide because you're kind of back to where you were. So you have to create a new system. We'll talk about that in actually just a second, integrated pest management. In regards to pesticides, this is something that will show up on the test. Whoops, swing back here. Is the Food Quality Protection Act was passed back in 1986, and what that did is it allowed the EPA to regulate some of these ingredients which are going into the food supply. So that was something that was new, and again, because of the amount of pesticides out there, it became an issue where the EPA is involved, which is a little bit weird. Two other agencies that are involved in the food production, as you might probably already know, is the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. So these three groups together are regulating our food supply. So some better ways, some better practices that we could use to create or cultivate our food would be all of these things listed together. Same idea with this that we mentioned earlier. And I believe we're getting pretty close to the end here. This gets into the genetic modified organisms we talked about earlier. All of these, they have definite pluses in regards to, increased plant growth and resistance to weather or pesticides, whatever it is we would like to put out there. There's a lot of goods. There's just some unknown potential harms that could be there. All right, integrated pest management. This is a method, swing on back. This could be a method that we could be using as far as mixing up, not just relying on our pesticides, but when we plant, how we plant, the types of pesticides, mixing things up would be a better approach in regards to trying to limit any of these negatives that we put into the crops or food production to have a better crop, I guess you would say. So integrated pest management is the way that we should looking at a little more of a smart growth system. That's it. That's the end of the 5th lecture.